Welcome. So as people are arriving into our webinar, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network powered by ISTE. The Every Learner Everywhere Network recently launched the Expert Network for professional learning and coaching for higher education faculty and leaders to support their students through and beyond the pandemic, including the transition to digital learning. We encourage you to visit the Expert Network website. We're posting that link in the chat currently so that you can get more information and also so you can schedule your coaching session. So welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning Interactive Conference Series. It is a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollaback, and I'm the Manager of Network Programs and Services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to take just a few minutes to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with the expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practice. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solution networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The other 2 networks focus on advising and developmental education. Here at Every Learner, we work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session, which will be shared after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, we welcome your questions in the Q&A section. If a participant raises their hands during the presentation, we will not be able to unmute you. However, we will be monitoring the Q&A as well as the chat section. As a biology professor and recovering associate dean, I'm excited about today's panel discussion on active and adaptive learning. Our moderator for today's panel is Dr. Megan Tassine, Director of the Personalized Learning Consortium at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. Megan directs the Adaptive Courseware for Early Success Grant for the Personalized Learning Consortium. In this role, she supports and collaborates with academic leadership from a variety of four-year universities to effectively adopt and implement adaptive learning technologies. Her work centers on enhancing pedagogy, closing achievement gaps, improving accessibility, and ensuring that students from all walks of life have the support and resources necessary to graduate. Megan is a social scientist by training with expertise in qualitative and mixed method research. She has taught introductory and upper level courses at the University of Northern Iowa and Georgia State University. In addition to project management and sociological research, she has extensive experience in program evaluation, faculty development, instructional support, and active learning communities. She has her PhD from Georgia State University and an MA from the University of Northern Iowa. Today's panelists are Dr. Peter Van Loosen, Director of Learning Experience and Student Success in Ed Plus at Arizona State University, and Susan Adams, Associate Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream. Dr. Van Loosen collaborates closely with academic departments and faculty on student success achievements initiatives, sorry about that, across diverse modalities and disciplines. His recent projects focused on collaborating on adaptive curriculum and courseware development, including designing MOOCs in a foreign language and spearheading innovative digital educational experiences for broad audiences. Before joining ASU, Peter worked as Assistant Director in the Office of Instructional Consulting in the School of Education at Indiana University and previously taught middle and high school German. Peter holds a PhD in Instructional Systems Technology from Indiana University Bloomington. His research interests include faculty development, instructional technology, instructional design, and innovative teaching and learning in face-to-face, hybrid, and online formats. As Associate Director in the Office of Instructional Consulting at ATD, Susan manages projects and programs designed to build institutional capacity to support intentional integration, professional development, and engagement of full-time and part-time faculty in fostering inclusive, student-focused college cultures. Susan produces dynamic thought leadership around instructional design and faculty engagement to both accelerate and sustain better student outcomes at ATD institutions nationwide. Susan earned an MED in Student Affairs Administration from the Woodring College of Education, Western Washington University, and a BA in English Literature and Women's Studies from the University of New Hampshire. I am now going to handle it over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Norma, and thank you for those introductions. You make us sound good, and we are good. I'm glad to be joined today by both Susan and Peter today, and thank you to our audience members for joining us this Friday afternoon. As Norma mentioned, I am Megan Tassine. I'm the director of the PLC at APLU. Sounds a lot shorter when we use those acronyms. We are one of the partner organizations of the Every Learner Everywhere Network, and I am very pleased to be joined here today by some of our field experts talking about the benefits and advantages of adaptive and active learning and what that looks like in the classroom and on your campus. As Norma mentioned, we'll start with some questions of our own, but we would like your questions as well. Please prioritize putting those in the Q&A, but also we'll be monitoring the chat. So without further ado, let's get started and have a conversation today. I'll go ahead and just open it up to both Susan, but if you could both just briefly introduce yourselves. I know we had some introductions, but just briefly speak to yourself, who you are and what your relationship is to this work. And then we'll move to Peter.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. I've been working with the adaptive learning technologies since my days at Portland State University, where I was senior instructional designer working on the initial grant that kind of brought this technology to the field of higher education. And that's where we got to experiment and kind of start from the ground up. How is this technology going to work in the classroom? And boy, did we learn a lot in those 2 years. And so I was able to take some of that research and also that expertise and understanding from the instructional design lens to achieving the dream, where we moved on to the second phase of the grant, bringing in different institutions to take it more to scale and continue to look at the data, look at the possibilities, and to try experimentation around how we can integrate this in the classroom effectively. So I'm excited to be here today to share some of those learnings as we move forward through the questions and the conversation. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, Susan. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. It's always good to hear a fellow instructional designer, and very similar to my experience. So again, I work in the office called the Ed Plus, which is a service unit to the university. And in that role, we partner with different academic departments on implementing, in this case, adaptive active solutions. So for us, adaptive active is really directly aligns with our charter here at ASU, which focus on access to education as well as student success. And in particular, we, as part of the grant, which was represented by Dale Johnson earlier here at ASU, we focus on the Gen Ed courses that we have, large enrollment courses. One of our challenges is that we have large enrollment courses, often with 300, 400, or even more students. And so we looked at the adaptive active methodology as a solution for that. I think we're going to share a little bit more about the outcomes a little bit later on. But just to help people understand a little bit the context, we have developed over 25 adaptive active courses. We are working on an adaptive undergraduate biology degree, which some people call the BioSpine. And we have annually about over 30,000 students go through the adaptive active, I guess, courses, if you want to say so. So it's quite some of the scale that we have to deal with. And we do this now on ground, immersion, as well as online. Thank you.
Thank you both. Appreciate that additional context. Susan, let's go ahead and start with you. So a lot of times these terms get thrown around, and folks have different definitions for them as well when we're talking about both active and adaptive learning, or even understanding the distinction between the two. For our audience today, can you offer us a distinction between these terms, active and adaptive learning, from your perspective?
Great question. Active learning is about putting the student at the center of their learning, right? So that's sort of the operating definition that we can all imagine. And so how that plays out with adaptive is by placing students at the center of their learning, we want to give them the agency to direct their own learning. Do that as many ways that we can. And that's done beautifully inside of the classroom when you get to bring the students a set of questions, bring them through a cognitive process, where they get to relate or take the agency to relate to the content being presented to them in such a way that becomes meaningful and relevant to them. Adaptive technology is a great opportunity for students to actually have their own pathway of learning, right? So when you look at adaptive learning courseware, students are engaged in, I almost want to call it the Rolls Royce of textbooks, where they get to engage in content in such a way that what their answers direct where their questions are going to come. So for example, if I answer a question that is difficult and I'm not answering it correctly, instead of getting it wrong, I'm going to be giving some remedial questions to then help me master that same content, right? So it becomes personalized and responsive to my own thinking and learning process, and helps direct my own learning, which makes it an active deployment, right? So it makes it an active technology. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we go, but typically a faculty member, not typically, but often a faculty member will have students go take the adaptive courseware experience prior to coming to class. So another distinction is when they come to class, they're prepared with the content, they're understanding it at a certain level in which then active learning strategies inside of the classroom can occur. So that's another way we like to think about the distinction between active and adaptive. Adaptive technology both allows for active learning to happen, but also inside of the experience of being in an adaptive learning courseware experience as a student becomes active for themselves, if that makes sense. Yeah, and Peter, you can riff off that as well.
No, that was very beautifully explained. So I think one way I like the adaptive technology is really there to provide the right lesson to the right student at the right time. And that's the very fundamental to this, is that, okay, personalized instruction is more effective than, I guess, generalized instruction and so on. And what we found, and that might be a little bit in addition to what you said, Susan, is that adaptive technology is very good at certain things, but not at all things. And active learning is really good at certain things, but not at all things either. So we really looked at this model as a combination of things, where we focused. Adaptive technology is really good on the fundamentals when we talk instructional design language, lower Bloom's taxonomy levels. But then the in-class or the active learning component is really good at the collaboration, as well as the higher order thinking kind of learning that needs to happen as well. So that's pretty much the only thing I would like to add as well. So,
all right. Thanks, Peter. So one of the things that we often run into, APLU, and I know some of our network partners as well, we work with a lot of different universities, and I know you're working with folks on the ground at ASU, is when you're having conversations about these different technologies or these approaches, are why should I do this work? How is it going to benefit me? How is it going to benefit my students? How would potentially benefit the campus? So from your perspective, what would you say are the top benefits of adaptive learning technologies to faculty and to students?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And if you don't mind, Susan, I'm going to start answering this one. So yeah, so there are numerous benefits to faculty as well as other stakeholders. And as I mentioned, one of the main challenges that we have here at ASU is the scale that we are working with, and trying to provide a personalized experience with several hundred students in the classroom tends to be a challenge, and also mostly not very effective and efficient, right? So for that very reason, using this adaptive active approach, the adaptive technology can provide the fundamentals for each individual student. And that's important to us, particularly if you look at the demographics of our enrollment and their backgrounds. We have a very diverse background, as well as if you look at our mission, which is access to education, we have pretty much a 95% acceptance rate at ASU. So we get people with diverse backgrounds and preparations in the same classroom, which are then traditionally were taught in large enrollment lecture style. So now with the adaptive component, that we were able to change that. So top benefits is, okay, we are able to provide a more personalized experience for the student, but also for faculty. They can actually see that their students are learning, and they can focus and then see the enjoyment of the that often happens in the active learning within the subject matter. So that's, I think, probably the most that I hear faculty say is the great thing. Hey, since I really see student learning, they're really excited, and that's great. Some other benefits of the adaptive technology is definitely the data that these tools provide. Since these are digital, we often we pretty much can track every student and can identify struggling students very, very early. So if we have large enrollment, we can see who is doing well, who is not doing well, and based on that, we can form interventions, or faculty can think about interventions. So they might say, hey, Peter, you seem to be a little bit struggling today. Why don't you come to my office hours, or why don't you talk to the TA? Why don't you go to tutoring, and these kind of things. So, and in addition to that, probably the last benefit that I'm going to mention is that with the adaptive technology, we as the way we implement it, we have faculty committees collaborate on what's happening within the curriculum. And so there's some kind of aligned curriculum that is carefully reviewed by the academic department and agreed upon as well, which has been, so not everybody starts from scratch, if you want to say so. Susan, what are your benefits?
Thanks so much. Thanks, Peter.
I would say you pretty much covered them all. I think that last piece is, I really want to just amplify. There's an opportunity for a real faculty learning community to emerge with this, especially when you're taking it at scale. And the idea is, when you look at the adaptive learning courseware, sometimes it is the textbook content that you've actually already been teaching, but it's added this adaptive technology to it. But there's opportunities to be able to change some of that content to be more responsive to that content emerging, right? So as we move forward in our field as experts and be passionate about our content, it does change over time. So that is also possible to be able to say, how are we going to leverage this particular content? How are we going to maybe change it too as we move forward? And because it's in this digital space, it has that possibility to be versioned, shall we say. And that's done beautifully when you have a community of experts in your field that are, corralling and focusing their energies around this content together, and can watch, how students are responding and then make decisions accordingly. So that's the benefit that I see. And that does take some support around getting those faculty communities together. And that's what we're here also to say, is there's the support there and possibilities for helping that to come into fruition.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and sometimes overlooked when we're thinking about, well, what are the benefits of faculty, is really this collaborative approach of thinking about teaching differently, right? That teaching does not have to be done in isolation by a single faculty member. You've got resources on your campus that you can connect with, of course, whether it's your Center for Teaching and Learning and Instructional Design folks, but you also have your fellow colleagues who are teaching some of the same courses, or other courses that are sequential in your program. One of the things that we've also been hearing from the institutions that we've been working with at APLU and some of our grant work is kind of going through the process of learning about these technologies and these practices. Their faculty are coming together and they really feel like they're going through a self-reflective process and really learning about what others are doing. And it's been really rewarding and engaging for them. And they're also learning more about what works best for their students and for their program to really kind of design a curriculum that makes sense from one course to the next, and also meets the students' needs, and also makes things easier for some of the faculty, right? So you've had a conversation one time with some faculty like, but I cover that in my class and it's the next one. You don't need to do that, right? Or you can, but let's work together on what makes sense in terms of coordinating those things so it is consistent across the board. So again, that's community effort, and that is kind of creating a bit of cultural transformation and change within those departments and on those campuses. So I appreciate you both speaking to that. Peter, you'd also mentioned the benefits of data, and Susan, you'd also talked about, we're learning about how students are doing and how faculty can kind of respond to that. I'm hoping, Susan, that you can speak to, from some of your experience of, what do, these technologies and these practices of adaptive courseware, and specifically, how is that going to potentially change the classroom experience for a faculty member, of what that looks like, how they're teaching, as well as, and we can talk about the student experience too, how the traditional model versus this new model might look different for them.
That's great. Oh, there's so much I could say about that. I'm trying to think about which way to enter that question. Megan, thank you. Yeah, a lot of it depends on the design, right? So I'm going to be the instructional designer now, put that hat on in a stronger way. There's a real choice point. Is this adaptive learning courseware going to be something that will introduce content to the students? Would it be something that would be a reinforcement? Is it going to be used as an assessment? Or overarchingly, would it be something that gives you as feedback to help inform what the content would be in the classroom, right? So when I think about where, I guess what I'm getting at is, where do you place the adaptive learning experience that the students go through in the course itself? And I mentioned earlier, we often see it done prior to the lecture. So students arrive to class at sort of a similar level, regardless of their what they've come with. They've all experienced something and gotten to a level of mastery inside of the courseware to then come to what we hope is a level playing field inside of the classroom. So that can then inform what you're going to do on that given day. So another example would be, I noticed that 75% of the students really struggled with this particular concept. And I just discovered that tonight, at 7 o'clock, and I'm going to go ahead and shift my lecture tomorrow morning, or in general, I'm going to give the first 10 minutes of class to address those misconceptions that I'm clearly seeing in the dashboard of the courseware. So that's a great, just in time learning that gets to happen with the adaptive courseware and where it gets placed in how you're going to teach the course. And then, like Peter said, it also helps with the intervention piece. So I've also seen faculty, and this kind of gets into deployment questions that might come up in our audience, is how are students actually doing this? When are they going to do this work? And I think Dale actually uses this example a lot, and I can't remember the faculty member's name, although I've met her. Peter, you might remember this, where she actually has, during class time, students are in a laboratory, circled computers at a desk, and they are taking the courseware. They're actually answering the questions, and she walks around along with her TAs and does, clarifies any misconceptions that come up. She'll notice patterns right on the fly and then stop everybody for a moment and do a quick 5-minute to 10-minute lecture, again, helping with those misconceptions. And that is active learning, right? And that's active teaching, to be in such a responsive space that this allows you to do in a more effective and efficient way. That's one example, and I'm sure Peter has more, and I have a couple more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, Peter, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question as well, specifically thinking about, how faculty are using some of that data and doing interventions in the classroom, and potentially even how ASU has been thinking about doing it at a higher level, at the institutional level of using that data.
Yeah, so data, I mean, as I said, one of the one of the good things and also the challenges of these digital platforms is that we have a lot of data, and maybe sometimes too much data. So some of the it's really hard sometimes to find the right questions. So from instructor level and from a faculty perspective, I think there are 3 questions. Is really, when you look, imagine yourself sitting in a lecture hall. You have hundreds of students in front of you, and I'm an instructor myself. So I look at these faces, and so I don't know who is learning, who's struggling, what are they struggling with, and then as an instructor, is how can I help them, right? So these are really the questions that I have as an instructor when I teach and so on. And if you look at your faces and so on, you're not really sure. But due to the data that you're getting from the adaptive courseware and so on, you can really quickly identify who's struggling, who's on track, and so on as well. So that's really what Susan was mentioning us too. So some of the things that we are working on as well have started implementing with some of our math classes in particular. So because we have so many people going through this, we are able to start a little bit predicting whether people are on track to be successful in the class or not. So, and based on that, we can create early identifiers and maybe interventions to keep people on track to be successful in the class. So Part of our approach is that we are working closely with our institutional research group. It's called the Action Lab, and they help us create, like, or us as administrators as well as instructors, create meaningful dashboards. And these dashboards, we can see, quickly identify students who who are doing well, who are not doing so well, and who could need some help as well. So it's really like an early indicator of interventions as well. So that's really from the instructor level, and that has been quite successful, in particular in math and so on, where we have quite a large number of students and defined these predictive analytics fairly well. On another level, of course, that data can help you measure success. And depending on how you measure success, you can, we can look at student performance, retention. You can look at diversity and equity, the performance of different groups, and these kind of things as well. So that's something we are tracking carefully, as well as informing how we would then either form an intervention or redesign the course material as well. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You got me thinking on some of the things both of you are talking about. So I know I shared some questions earlier, but I'm going to pivot a little bit based on our dialogue here. What we've been hearing from lots of faculty sometimes, and what you're describing, it is a lot of data and it is a lot of information. Faculty are already doing so much, right? Especially if you are learning a new technology for the very first time, and really thinking about how to get started with all of this work. And for instance, we have conversations with some of the faculty as well as, they hear course redesign. That's a huge undertaking, right? But you don't necessarily have to do it all at once. So I guess in terms of thinking about a faculty or a program, department chair, is coming to you and asking you, like, how do I get started on this work in a way that's actually practical, right? In terms of timing, and I don't have to bite off more than I need to chew. So what would be your advice for folks who want to get started, but maybe don't necessarily have, they don't want to do it all at once? Susan, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay.
You're welcome.
Right. Well, I bet you someone's going to throw in the chat, because I'm going to ask them to, the implementation guide, but also the backwards design workbook are some great places to start just for some assets, but I'll speak to that. Yeah, I really appreciate you saying, Megan, starting small. And that's really important. So there is sort of a step in saying, what problem are you trying to solve, right? That we believe that adaptive could help support in solving that. And that can be all kinds of things, DFW rates and, student success data points to increase that or close the gaps for you, and also to make your teaching experience richer. So I would recommend, if you can, to talk to an instructional designer and or your colleagues who have used the technology before, to be able to talk through, let's look at your whole course and where can be ways that we might insert one module, right? So maybe this particular concept is misconstrued, students don't understand it. It's one of the most difficult. Starting with just that and having one module be an adaptive courseware piece would be a great way to begin, both in understanding what it is that this content can do for the students, how are they going to respond, how are my particular students going to respond, and experiment with just 1 week. So that's what I kind of mean by baby steps. I also want to address that concept of all of a sudden I have all this data, what do I do with it? That can be super overwhelming as well. And even just conceptualizing a dashboard. And I do think it's really important that as faculty, we think through how to be thoughtful around that data, because these are human beings, right? And we need to humanize the internet as much as possible. We need to humanize this technology. And that's what our role is as faculty, is to be able to take that data and recognize, okay, what could be happening here? But let's talk to the students directly. Let's figure out how to do these interventions in a reasonable manner and make sure we're checking and held accountable for that. And I don't want to put all of that on faculty either, right? And there's hopes that there are administrators possibly on this call as well to think about how can we support ourselves as educators, as a community of educators, to make meaning of this data and make meaning of it effectively and well, so that we're not marginalizing students even more or pigeonholing them or creating numbers, right? To human faces. So there is definitely a place for us to increase our capacity in doing that, but not doing it in a siloed way or feeling in an isolated way. So that's something that we are working on, and we all need to be thinking about, whether as adaptive learning technology or just your institutional research department handing you a bunch of data on your student demographics. We all need to think through, how do we make meaning well to that data?
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, I mean, again, excellent points. So I really want to reiterate, start small, prototype it, maybe even what we did with some of our instructors, where we asked several students to come for practice lessons, and our instructors actually prototype the lessons with them just to see how they feel and so on as well. So start small, because as you really think about it, there's a lot of things that need to be considered and you need to become familiar with as an instructor, right, or as a faculty member. There's, of course, the technology piece. Everybody thinks that's, I mean, the technology has to be easy to use. You have to be familiar with it, and you have to understand what does it mean when students are on different levels at the same time. But these are actually not, in my opinion, not the hardest things. So, you also have to consider, okay, how do I create active learning experiences around this? And doing good active learning takes a lot of hard work. So I think one of the lessons I want to say, adaptive active learning is not easy. It takes a lot of hard work to do it right. All right. So what can we do to get a little head start on this? So as Susan said, start small, look at the APLU guides. So look what other people have been doing successfully, talk to them as well, because there are a lot of lessons that we learned along the way. So maybe you don't have to repeat these lessons as well. And something, I want to really reiterate is that you're not alone. Right. This is and I would even claim that it's very hard to do on your own. So who can you tap into at your institution, or even within your course or in your class, to help you? So think about, okay, so faculty, colleagues, think about teaching assistants. Often we do use undergraduate assistants as well. So students who might be a little bit further along in the program, they come in and help with some of the facilitation techniques. As Megan and Susan said, you have often instructional support staff like instructional designers, instructional technologists, and so on. For the data, we are very fortunate to have our institutional research group. So maybe a data analyst, can help you with making meaning out of the different data that's available and so on. And depending on how much you decide on developing materials yourself, you might want to tap into, the media group that you have available, graphic designers, videographers, and these kind of things as well. So what really is adaptive active learning is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And I'm a big soccer fan, so I love that analogy all the time. So there are different roles you have to play.
All right, thank you, Peter. And we've got a couple of questions, and I'll address them as they make sense in terms of the conversation. And I do think one of them does right now, and that is a question of cost. Certainly cost to student often comes up, but in terms of thinking about working, just with an individual faculty or just on a specific module of a course. Peter, I know ASU has been building out its active and adaptive program to build out capacities and infrastructure for years now, right? So obviously there's the institutional considerations to be made. This takes time, energy, resources, building out capacities and knowledge, and some of these things either don't exist on a campus yet, or you've got all of the maybe resources there, but they're not necessarily being targeted towards this. How are you folks approaching that, or how would you respond to this question in terms of what does it cost, and not necessarily a specific number, but things that should be considered by folks as they're thinking about planning this out from an institution-wide approach, or even just working within a specific program?
Yeah, great question. Something that we get asked all the time, particularly with the number of students and the number of adaptive courses and the different models of adaptive implementation that we have. So I think probably the highest cost is the onboarding or the initial stage phase, if you want to say so. And there are different models that you can use. So I would call it the out-of-the-box model, where you can buy a product that has some kind of adaptivity and that you just need to configure. So what you need to do as an instructor or as an instructor with your team, you need to review it. You need to make decisions about what learning objectives will be addressed, what materials will be there, how it will integrate with your other materials that you have as well. So that takes time. In general, I recommend minimum of 3 months and probably $5,000, but that's probably at the lowest level, right? On the other hand of the spectrum, probably is where you start from scratch. There's no existing material, and you decide as a team to build an adaptive platform, adaptive course. You may work with one of the adaptive platforms that are out there, but you create everything, ranging from videos, assessment items, to graphics, to text, and so on. So we have done that as well. And in general, we say it costs about $150,000 to do so. Time-wise, the average is between 9 and 18 months to do so. So it's quite the range that we have, quite the range of cost. But if you have to really think about and do the math on this, right? So, the return on investment, if you want to say so, is the outcomes are beneficial for the university, and make this money worth it, if you want to see, if you talk about retention numbers and these kind of things, just by looking at the scale that we have. So we do some creative accounting there as well, and we are making sure that we, I guess, recuperate the investment and it's worth it. And so we make sure that it's channeled in the right direction.
Thanks, Peter. Susan, anything else you'd like to add here?
I wasn't sure if the question would come down to what the students have to pay for it as well. I think that might be an added extra piece.
I think that's important,
yeah, I've seen anywhere from actually just $25, right? So bringing that down from a $200, huge textbook cost down to $25 to getting the code to access the software. And then that varies, of course, across. So I've seen anywhere from 25 to 75, but it really doesn't go much past that, which is a great thing to see in the marketplace right now for the students' impact in terms of cost.
Yeah, we've definitely seen either at the same value or even less than in terms of the cost, because it's basically it's not a replacement of the textbook, but that's like the cost replacement, right, for students. And most of the institutions we've been working with, we've seen different approaches to this. For instance, an institution might have a textbook fee and then or a tech fee, and they allocate it for that purpose for the students, so they pay nothing out of pocket, or they just have the students. It's like a student purchasing their own books. The other consideration, I think, in terms of there's obviously the courseware itself that a student might be purchasing, but for those students who, within these improved teaching models, we're finding that when done well, you have this active and adaptive approach, more students are passing their course. So you have less students failing, less students retaking those courses. And there's a cost savings to students as well in that capacity as well. So things that should also be considered. For our folks, I know we've got folks who are faculty and instructional designers and faculty development folks on with us today, and really thinking about how they want to approach this work or get folks interested or informed about it, or even just having faculty become aware and interested in this work. I'd like to just, Peter, I'll start with you on this one. How do folks get faculty to, adopt these approaches or, get started on this?
Yeah, in general, and at ASU, we have different approaches that we have. As I said, originally, it was a direct intervention to improve the learning experience and student success for our general education courses. So there was a strategic initiative that was sanctioned by the university, supported by the grant and these kind of things. So, but that alone gave us a lot of momentum, and people started looking at the success that we are having, that other people wanted to participate, other instructors participated, and so on. So that's automatically like particularly our success in biology caused us to expand this approach into the adaptive undergraduate online degree of biology, which is one of the fastest growing and most successful online degrees for AAC Online. And we have close to over 200 programs right now. So that's been quite positive there. So there's a lot of word of mouth, and we do have, of course, a lot of research that's being conducted on this and so on. So in general, to get other faculty enthusiastic about it, have your champions share what they're doing, how it's beneficial to them, how it's helping them to be better teachers. Have your students share how it's beneficial to them, and so on, and how the approach is helping them. But then also back this up with the research and numbers. So, and depending on stakeholders, you might want to think about what numbers you want to present. Some people are interested more in the financials, while other people are definitely more interested in like the research and the learning outcomes and so on as well. So.
Thanks, Peter. Susan, I know you have a lot of experience with this too, not only at your role at Achieving the Dream, but your previous work at Portland State as well. Really talking to faculty to get them to understand this work and what it is, what it looks like, what it takes, and getting them, started as well. How do you approach that?
So we primarily work with community colleges, so we're in a little bit of a different space than ASU. And we do find that finding those champions are really one great strategy to go with. We've also found that some departments have discovered adaptive technology, whether they were marketed to by an adaptive provider or a faculty member that was really just seeking different content and different delivery of their own content. So all of a sudden, they've got this adaptive technology and didn't even tell their dean. So it can happen sort of from the ground up as well, which I think, to me, I just smile at that, at the innovation and the risk taking that many faculty are willing to take and try something out. Especially those, and we found that those that kind of try it out on their own have been really heartfelt in noticing that their students are struggling and that they are in large class sizes where they can't reach everybody. And this was a solution for them to be able to do that. So I think speaking to those benefits on a variety of levels is important for also you to amplify on your campuses, again, and kind of connecting to where are the pain points in your student success and assessing that clearly for yourselves and looking at the demographics and your community around your college to be able to say, what are our needs and who is our population? And getting to know the students first is really where you want to start in deciding whether or not this is a technology that's going to work best for you. So that's a lot of what Achieving the Dream does. We come in and do a full assessment of the campus at a very intimate level to be able to look at what those gaps are and then help say, okay, well, here's your menu of items, and adaptive technology is very much on that list. And then we can speak to really personalizing that solution to meet that gap that shows up in the assessment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, one of the things that, and I think both ATD and APLU, we've done this in terms of, I would say, our institutional coaching model, right? When we're working with the different universities and colleges that we are, is if exemplars don't necessarily exist on the campus yet, we bring some in, right? Or finding out who's doing this work and who's doing it really well, or who have good programs, and setting up an event or a webinar or just some sort of educational programming where either the leadership themselves can learn a little bit more about it, or inviting folks who you think might be receptive to it, whether they are deans or chairs or some of those faculty coordinators are kind of interested in doing a course or curriculum redesign or alignment and thinking about technology in new ways, starting with those folks and having a conversation about this. And one of the things that we often find is yes, we're talking about adaptive learning, but it's never about the technology. We are not techno solutionists here. This is about an ecosystem approach. We are building out a robust and comprehensive ecosystem on your campus for your students to be supported and for the faculty to be supported as well in service of that work. And really thinking about how you can take this from an institutional approach. What resources do you have on campus? What are the things that you know? What are the things that you don't know? And who should you be talking to from the field to come in and help educate you? And that's something that the Every Learner Everywhere Network helps do, along with some of our network partners in the conversations and programming that we offer some of the institutions as well. Now, it's kind of speaking to some of that techno solutionism. I'll do a little throwback on that. As in terms, I want to think about this with our folks here on the call today around the issue of equity. And we're going to focus a little bit on that, but also in terms of, how faculty should be thinking about equity in the classroom as they're doing this. Because one of the things that we're doing this work in service of equity, right? We want our students to be doing better. And we also understand that some students are disproportionately represented in, potentially not doing as well in those courses. How can faculty and institutions really center equity in this work, or what are some of the questions and considerations they should be thinking about as they're approaching this work? Because again, this is not a silver bullet. It's not going to fix things, and it might actually introduce new problems that could potentially perpetuate, inequity in other ways. So, I'm just going to kind of open it up, and Susan, feel free to respond from the heart today and how you're feeling on that, and let's have some conversation around that.
Part of me wants to lob it over to Peter first.
Yeah, do you want me? Okay, I'm going
Sure,
to get started
that'd be
then. And how about that? And then let's have a conversation about this, because this is a very current topic. And I mean, that needs to be addressed as well as also on the forefront of many people right now, and very important. So here's something, one of, again, we're going to come back to the data here. One of the benefits is really that we can really understand how different people with different backgrounds are doing, right? So, and we can see this by group. We can see how they're doing, when they are doing, and these kind of things. So that allows us to really clearly understand the situation, right? So, and it's very granular that we can do that. So based on that, and I don't think we have figured it out yet, and that's part of my expanded role that I'm fulfilling, is like, I really have to think about what are interventions, what are ways to improve. What we're seeing in general across the board, adaptive, active is beneficial for everyone. But what we're seeing is that it's not beneficial in the same rate for everyone. So that's important to understand. So yes, it's good, but not good enough for everyone. So there's something that we need to do. And Susan will appreciate that, because as instructional designers, we are system thinkers. We are thinking about instructions, but also about other ways that we can support our students. And that might be something from how we advise them, how we communicate with them, how we support financial models and these kind of things. But also going down, especially if we are developing the courses ourselves, we can really influence what's happening in the learning experience, like looking at visuals, like who are people, do we have an inclusive mindset? Are people represented in the right way? Do we draw from different backgrounds and so on within the learning experience itself? So we can influence this, and we do this. And as you know, the field is doing a lot of work in that area. This is the Peralta rubric that's pretty commonly used. But there are other ways that we are working with our courses. We actually do have a task force on that, and particularly our biology courses, again, are on the forefront of that to ensure our students, our learning experience are inclusive. And so we do reviews before courses launch, and we have people commenting on word choices, images, icons, all these things. And that's something takes time, takes effort, but we are doing that and getting started. I don't think we have found the solution yet, but we are at least working on it. So I would love to hear, Susan, how you think about this.
Yeah, well, I think there's a deeper piece for me that I think about when we're doing a lot of work at Achieving the Dream around culturally responsive curriculum design and redesign. And we're currently adapting the NYU Steinhardt's culturally responsive scorecard, which helps bring to mind, who is represented in our content, right, in our courses, but also what knowledge bases are, right? So when we are in a Eurocentric, white-centric ideology within our course content, is that that's the norm? That's what should be taught, versus being able to say we have multiple cultures, we have multiple ways of thinking, we have multiple ways of knowing. So I think we are at a stage in our development right now of putting into question those Eurocentric ideas of how we learn, how we teach, and the content within our field. So it's an edge right now, and I think it's an important inquiry-based space that we're in. And that's where, when I look at adaptive, I think about, where can we shift some of that content? And often these platforms allow for what we call open educational resources, which allows you to put in additional content and or make meaning of the content that is there in such a way that allows you to have the students say, wow, this is very Eurocentric. What does that mean for the field? Right? So that we're all in a community of learning together. And as faculty, we are facilitating that questioning that's going on in our world right now. So that takes some support and some adaptability, pun intended, for yourselves in thinking through, how am I conceptualizing my field as a whole? So I think that's, we are all at the frontier mindset right now of that. And I think it's a provocative question. It's an important dialogue. And I'm thinking through as an instructional designer, and I noticed in the chat, someone said we're consultants, but, we're also guides and we're also thought partners, so it's not that Peter and I have all the answers, but we're in a space of saying we are open to and leaning into these harder questions.
Thank you both for those comments. We've had at least another comment in the chat and as well in the Q&A that referenced this as well, because I know we've been talking about, certainly the issues of equity. We've already talked a little bit about access, but mostly in reference to cost, right? But I want to talk about access in terms of accessibility to students and ADA, as well as, our neurodiversity and an ability of students as well as faculty to use these emerging technologies in the classroom, whether it's online or in person, and some of the limitations on that. I guess, what are some of the issues that are kind of coming up for you? If you have data to kind of speak to this, or what conversations are happening on your campus or with campus leaders around these issues and how they're approaching this question.
Susan, why don't you take this one first? I helped you out last time.
So Megan, can you reword that a little bit more for me? We wanted to get at the issue here because
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wasn't 100% sure either, so thank you.
I like to feel my way around an idea rather than being direct, as you all know.
Yeah.
But again, really just thinking about issues of accessibility for students.
Accessibility.
Right? Accessibility in the sense of, whether it is an issue of neurodiversity or physical limitations, et cetera, for students, especially when we are talking about these new technologies coming into the classroom, right? And educational technology potentially having, not being as accessible to those students. So, what sort of things are popping up in, your conversations or on your campuses around these issues, or how you're handling that to ensure that they are accessible?
They've gotten a lot better, I will say. When we first started this at PSU, the accessibility question was just such a strong and challenge, because literally these providers out of Silicon Valley were not doing it, right? And we was pulling tooth and nail to get even, and this is a hard one, but we asked them to have downloadable PDFs of the content for those students that need to use Dragon readers to be able to consume the content. And that's where the accommodation needs to come in. But we need the providers to offer that to us. We don't have the time to repurpose this content in such a way to meet all the needs of students that need an accommodation. So I'm seeing much stronger that they are providing that type of technology. There are strategies that faculty can take, but I blob it back to the provider of the courseware to provide that for us and give those alternatives to help us make those changes or help us provide what those accommodations are for the students. So yeah, we do have to pivot, even if it weren't an adaptive technology, and the accommodations office are now getting more and more adept at being able to do that with the adaptive technologies. We're not fully there yet. So there are times where there needs to be fully alternative assignments to the adaptive for certain students. And so, but that does need to be placed into our planning of the course before it's deployed. And we're still continuing to work on that I'm seeing in colleges.
Thanks, Susan. Peter.
Yeah, I think it's a very good summary of the status where we are. You know, there definitely has been improvements over time. I think that's where the power of a partnership between an educational institution and the technology provider comes into play. You know, technology providers don't necessarily think about these issues as well as they are not aware of how to address them. So good thing is there are laws, right? So we are, you know, everybody has certain minimum expectations and so on. And what we were able to do, we have a close relationship with our DRC, which is our Disability Research Center, and we are able to partner with our technology vendors in order to provide these accommodations necessary. In particular, when we, if they are like, you can't, often they're case by case basis, but we do our best as we develop the courseware to address I guess the minimum standards, if you want to say so, like all text, readability with screen reader, and all, making sure that videos have closed captioning and a transcript and all these kind of things. So there's a lot of resources flowing into that as well. At the same time, that does not cover every accommodation. So in that case, we are partnering with the vendors in order to make the learning experience the same, which is we are required by law, right? So that's what we're doing. But is it sometimes easy? No, it takes effort, right? So,
and I have to say, I just want to applaud Peter and ASU. They have been such a strong leader in influencing the Silicon Valley developers, right? Because it's not an easy relationship, but it's gotten better over time. And I really believe that we can have a much stronger relationship with Silicon Valley and higher education. And it's critical that we do. And I just want to applaud you and Dale for forwarding that and being able to get into that arena, that kind of a conversation because of your resources, because it's trickling down to us in that way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there is power in community, and also just an openness and willingness to be having these conversations, because it is vital, right? It's not necessarily that, a technology is handed over into an institution and it's, that's it, right? That there is always room for improvement, and even meeting the baseline standards of, what's legal, still not good enough. We need to do better. And we should be partnering with our technology providers to really, understand these critical issues of what this looks like in practice on a campus, how it's affecting students and faculty, and how to improve those so that they can help in that process as well. Yeah, we've definitely been thinking about how the Every Learner Network, as well as our different partner organizations as we're working with institutions, is how do we capture those learnings and those struggles and articulate it and have those conversations within the technology vendors space as well, to really think about how we can help drive this too, because it is it is a relationship, and it goes both ways, and we should be having an open and communicative conversation that is collaborative and in service of students and our institutions as well. So thank you both, and for both of you for the work that you do. You're both awesome. You've joined us this Friday afternoon as well. I believe we are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things back over to Norma. And again, thanks to our audience members for joining us today.
Thank you so
Have
much,
a great
Megan.
weekend.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
thank you for the opportunity.
You are on mute.
Okay, now we got it straight. I want to thank you, Megan, Peter, Susan. It was a wonderful conversation. I think that we really got some good information shared out there. And I hope this really engages a lot of our audience to, start considering that transition to active and adaptive learning, or if they are starting in that path, that they will be the champions to bring everybody else on board that should be coming on board. With that in mind, we ask that our participants, our audience, take a few minutes to complete our survey for today's presentation. The link is going to be provided for you in the chat. If you've got something going on immediately after, don't worry, we'll send you the link to the survey when we send you the recording next week. I would also like to just thank our audience for participating and actively asking us questions and challenging us. As a quick reminder, we do encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website and our resources page. You'll find some of those references that we talked about today in terms of the implementation guide and some of the case studies with ASU on our resources page. We also encourage you to visit our expert network webpage if you've got questions about digital learning and equity and would like to sign up for our coaching sessions. Again, thank you very much to Megan, our moderator, and Susan and Peter, our panelists. Thank you to our audience for participating in today's discussion. We look forward to seeing you April 2nd for our next webinar, Designing with Quality and Engagement at the Forefront. You all have a wonderful weekend, and thank you very much.